Hey guys, tonight we step right into the cold, sterile hum of an ICU where your son lies fighting for his life. The fluorescent lights flicker just enough to remind you how fragile everything feels, and the scent of antiseptic clings to the air like a constant shadow. You trudge past the rows of waiting chairs and hushed whispers, your heart thudding like a faulty drum. You probably won't survive this without feeling your chest tighten in that unmistakable raw kind of panic. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious how late it is where you are while we unravel this story. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand outside the ICU room, the glass door fogged slightly from the contrast of the cold hall and the warmth inside. Your son is hooked up to a tangle of machines, beeping monitors, IVs dripping slowly, and oxygen masks making his breath a fragile sound. The sterile smell is almost overwhelming, but your focus narrows on the rhythm of those machines and his faint chest rising and falling. ICUs have been a cornerstone of modern medicine since the 1950s, when doctors first realized the need for specialized care for critically ill patients, a fact that makes you appreciate the miracle of technology amidst the bleakness. But you can't help but notice how this place feels oddly detached, clinical, less about healing and more about managing odds. Interestingly, historians still argue whether the ICU's impersonal environment helps or hinders emotional recovery. Some say the sterile atmosphere protects families from the raw reality, while others believe it deepens isolation. You can't shake the weight pressing down, but the quiet chaos in your mind is interrupted by your mother's voice ringing through your phone, cheerful and completely out of sync with the tension you're swallowing. The contrast hits you like a cold splash of water. Your son clinging to life in the ICU, and your mother chattering on about the big birthday party she's planning. You can almost picture her in the living room, surrounded by balloons and half-inflated streamers, blissfully unaware of the chaos in your world. You try to explain the gravity of the situation, but she brushes it off with a laugh, telling you, "You need a break, honey. Life goes on." It's surreal how your family's priorities seem completely upside down. It reminds you of the Victorian era, when social gatherings were considered more important than personal grief. Back then, society valued appearances and public celebrations so much that mourning rituals were highly formalized, almost theatrical. You think about how historians still argue whether such public displays of emotion were genuine or just a way to keep up social status. Maybe your mother's focus on the party is her own defense mechanism, a desperate grasp at normalcy when everything else feels broken. You take a deep breath, the sterile air of the hospital mixing with the memory of your mother's bright voice. You wonder if she's using that party as a shield, avoiding the painful reality by focusing on something tangible and festive. You want to scream at her to care about your son, but instead you stay silent, knowing the fragility of her own world, her way of coping. There's a strange irony here. You're surrounded by beeping machines, sterile sheets, and whispered prayers, while just miles away, a cake is being baked and decorations hung. The dichotomy is almost too much to bear. You sit quietly, the weight of the situation sinking deeper, wondering if anyone really understands the delicate balance between hope and despair. You remember the moment the doctors told you your son was critical, those words echoing like a cracked bell in your mind. The ICU walls, gleaming with their cold, unfeeling white tiles, seem to close in on you as you sit by his bedside. Your son's chest rises and falls with the help of machines, each beep a reminder of how fragile life is. Meanwhile, back home, your mother is deciding on the party's theme and guest list. It feels almost like a cruel joke. You recall how in medieval Europe, people believed in memento mori, the practice of reminding oneself of mortality through symbols like skulls and hourglasses. The idea was to live life fully, knowing death was always near. You wonder if your mother understands this truth or if she's trying to ignore it entirely. Historians still argue whether memento mori helped people accept death or just masked their fear with ritual. You think maybe your mother's party planning is her way of masking fear, clinging to joy in the face of impending loss. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Your heart aches watching your son struggle, while your mother plans a celebration like everything is fine. It's like living in two worlds simultaneously, one filled with sterile machines and whispered hopes, the other with balloons, laughter, and oblivious cheer. You glance at your son's pale face, and then at the clock, ticking away the minutes. The air is heavy with unspoken emotions: love, fear, frustration, and a yearning for some sense of normalcy. Somewhere in this mix, you're trying to hold it all together, wondering if your family will ever understand the real gravity of what you're living through. You sit in the hospital waiting room, the harsh fluorescent lights humming above like an endless reminder of the sterile world you're trapped in. Your phone buzzes with messages about the birthday party your mother is obsessing over. Photos of invitations, flower arrangements, and guest RSVPs. You almost laugh at the absurdity, but instead it just feels like salt rubbed into a wound. It's curious how the human brain copes with stress. Ancient Egyptians believed the heart was the center of thought and emotion, so when someone died, the heart was weighed against a feather in the afterlife to determine their fate. Today, we know it's the brain, but that weight you feel in your chest? That's very real. Oddly enough, some medieval healers used leeches to balance humors in the body, thinking it would cure ailments. You wonder if your mother's focus on the party is her way of balancing humors, trying to distract from pain with a dose of celebration. Historians still argue whether such medical practices did more harm than good, but the idea that distraction can soothe suffering isn't new. You try to remind yourself that your mother might be coping in the only way she knows how. Denial wrapped in confetti and cake. The hospital feels like a world away from the party preparations, yet both are happening simultaneously, colliding in your mind like two sides of the same coin. You wonder how your son would feel if he knew. Would he want the party? Would he understand your mother's choice? The buzzing phone and distant laughter from the cafeteria feel like echoes from different planets. You breathe in deeply, feeling the sterile hospital air fill your lungs. In this moment, all you want is for your family to see what you see, to feel what you feel. But for now, you're alone in this quiet battle, holding on to hope by a thread. You finally step out of the hospital and into the fading afternoon light, the crisp air, a sharp contrast to the cold, artificial scent inside. Your mind spins between the sterile ICU and the garish balloons and streamers your mother is so intent on perfecting. The contradiction is almost surreal, your son's fragile life hanging in the balance while a party rolls ahead, oblivious. It's interesting how parties, especially birthdays, have evolved over centuries. The ancient Romans celebrated birthdays with lavish feasts, gifts, and even public holidays. In contrast, the Victorian era introduced more restrained, formal celebrations, historically linked to rising middle-class values. Your mother's party seems stuck somewhere in between, a chaotic blend of excess and tradition. You recall reading about the origins of the birthday cake, which some historians trace back to ancient Greece, where round cakes symbolized the moon goddess Artemis. It's funny how something so sweet and celebratory can feel so bitter now. Historians still argue whether modern birthday parties have become more about social performance than genuine celebration. You wonder if your mother's insistence on the party is less about the birthday itself and more about maintaining appearances, keeping up the family's image in front of friends and relatives. Your phone buzzes again, a picture of your mother arranging candles. You stare at it, caught between frustration and sadness. Somewhere deep inside, you understand her need to cling to normalcy, even if it feels painfully misplaced. Walking through the quiet street, you try to clear your head, but the weight lingers. You think about your son's fight in the ICU and wonder how many battles families endure silently, with pain and joy awkwardly intertwined. The party buzzes behind the closed door as you slip back inside, your footsteps muffled against the plush carpet. Laughter and music swirl in the air, but all you hear is the distant beeping of machines, the reality of the ICU still echoing in your mind. You spot your mother smiling wide, but her eyes lack the warmth you crave. Historically, family dynamics have often revolved around control and tradition. Think of the 18th century salons in France, where family honor was paramount, and gatherings were more about power plays than enjoyment. It's a bit like this. Your mother's party is her domain, a way to assert control in a world that feels slipping away. You glance over at your brother, chatting with his fiancée, completely unaware of the silent storm brewing beneath the surface. That moment, The one when his fiancée had whispered your name at the engagement dinner still lingers like a ghost. It's strange how one simple phrase can stop an entire room, make even your father speechless. Did you know that in some cultures, like the Maasai of Kenya, silence during family gatherings is a sign of respect and reflection? But here, the silence feels heavy, charged with unspoken resentment and unresolved tension. Historians still argue whether family secrets help maintain social order or whether they inevitably cause more harm in the long run. Your family's silence feels like a brittle shield, protecting fragile egos but cracking under pressure. Your mother approaches, patting your shoulder awkwardly, her smile forced. You can't help but feel like an outsider at your own family event, caught between grief and obligation. You drift toward the kitchen, seeking a moment's refuge from the noise and forced cheer. The scent of burnt toast lingers oddly beneath the sweet aroma of cupcakes. It's funny how food, meant to bring comfort, can sometimes remind you of absence. The tradition of birthday food is centuries old. In medieval Europe, peasants would mark the day with simple cakes made from barley and honey. Far from today's sugary extravaganzas, the symbolic role of food at celebrations connects us across time. Yet your mother's fixation feels hollow tonight. You overhear a conversation about your son's condition, but can't bring yourself to join. Instead, you remember reading that in the 19th century, hospitals were places people feared, often associated with death rather than healing. The ICU's sterile halls seem to confirm that fear sometimes still lingers. There's a quirky fact about how some cultures use specific birthday rituals to ward off evil spirits, like the Polish tradition of punching the birthday person once for each year they've lived. You think, maybe your mother's party is her way of fighting her own fears. Historians still debate the psychological impact of family gatherings during times of crisis. Can forced celebrations help mend broken bonds, or do they just paper over cracks? You glance at your watch. Time feels fractured, slipping too fast and too slow at once. Your heart is both heavy and hopeful, tangled in a knot that no party balloon can untie. The chatter grows louder as the evening progresses, but your thoughts drift back to the ICU. The stark white walls, the smell of antiseptic, the constant hum of machines, it all feels like another world. It's curious how hospitals, once considered places of last resort, have evolved into centers of hope and healing. In fact, the concept of intensive care units only came about in the mid-20th century during the polio epidemics, when patients needed constant monitoring. You lean against the counter, feeling the coolness of the marble beneath your fingertips. It's grounding in a way, a small anchor in the storm of emotions swirling inside you. Oddly enough, in Japan, there's a practice called forest bathing, spending mindful time in nature to soothe the soul. You wonder if a little of that calm could settle into this chaotic night. Meanwhile, your mother's laughter rings sharp, a little too loud. You catch a glimpse of your father's face, a mix of discomfort and regret. But no words come. There's a peculiar tension here, like the room itself is holding its breath. Historians still argue whether family loyalty should always come first or if individual needs deserve equal weight. Tonight, you're caught between those conflicting pulls, trying to navigate love, disappointment, and duty. You take a deep breath, your chest tight but steady. The party carries on around you, but your mind remains in that sterile ICU room, where your son fights quietly for every breath. You glance at your watch. Time feels both slow and relentless tonight. Your mother's birthday party, with its colorful balloons and endless chatter, seems almost surreal compared to the sterile ICU's quiet desperation. Birthdays have been celebrated for thousands of years, dating back to ancient Egypt where pharaohs' coronation days were honored much like birthdays. Yet here, the contrast feels stark. Celebration beside suffering, laughter beside silent prayers. You remember a quirky fact about birthdays. In medieval Europe, people believed evil spirits roamed on birthdays, which is why cakes were adorned with candles, to ward off those unwelcome guests. Now, here you are, caught between a party full of light and an ICU full of shadows. The fiancé's whisper from your brother's engagement dinner. Wait, you're Michael Carter? Echoes faintly in your mind, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving and stories can hide deep beneath the surface. You notice your father's eyes meet yours for a fleeting moment. The silence is louder than words. It's an unspoken acknowledgement of your pain and the rift growing wider with every ignored hospital update. Historians still argue whether family events like birthdays should always take precedence or if emergencies demand a break from tradition. Tonight, that debate isn't academic, it's painfully real. You sip your drink slowly, tasting the bitter tang of helplessness, mingled with forced smiles. Somewhere between the party's glitter and the ICU's beeping machines, you wonder if anyone else feels the same quiet heartbreak simmering just beneath the surface. The night stretches on like a long, tired sigh. You drift between the sterile hospital corridors and the noisy birthday party, each a different world, yet strangely linked by your tangled emotions. The ICU monitors beep with steady, unyielding rhythm, almost like a heartbeat that won't quit. It's the kind of persistent sound that historians believe helped early human societies develop a sense of time and urgency, guiding decisions that meant life or death. You recall a strange custom from the Victorian era where mourning families would hold death parties to celebrate the life of the recently departed, an eerie blend of sorrow and festivity, much like what you're living now. The juxtaposition feels uncanny, and you wonder if your family's party might have some of that same bittersweet spirit without realizing it. Your mother's laughter rings out, carefree and bright, a stark contrast to the cold anxiety knotting your stomach. You remember a quirky fringe idea some anthropologists propose, that the louder the party, the more it drowns out the uncomfortable truths no one wants to face. Maybe your mother's party is just noise trying to mask a deeper pain she can't express. Historians still argue whether emotional disconnects in families during crises are the result of generational trauma or simple selfishness. Whatever the cause, you feel the distance growing, a chasm wider than you ever imagined. You sit quietly, feeling the weight of unspoken words and the ache of isolation. Yet in this silence you find a strange clarity. Maybe it's the weariness, or maybe it's the quiet acceptance that some battles are fought alone, even when surrounded by people. You take a slow breath, the kind that tries to calm a storm inside you. The party continues without you fully, and somewhere, in the hush of the hospital, hope flickers faintly. The next morning arrives sluggishly, the hospital's fluorescent lights humming softly above you like an uninvited lullaby. You trudge back to the ICU, clutching a lukewarm coffee that tastes like disappointment and caffeine combined. It's funny how hospitals haven't changed much since the early 1900s, when antiseptics revolutionized medicine, turning places of death into places of healing, though some smells stubbornly refuse to evolve. You overhear a nurse chatting about a patient who survived against all odds thanks to a new treatment, sort of like a medical miracle that historians still debate if it was luck or skill. That reminds you of your son fighting his own battle in that tiny room behind the glass. Meanwhile, the birthday party your mother insisted on hasn't ended. You catch a glimpse of the leftover balloons and cake in the trash on your way back, deflated, sticky, forgotten. There's a strange symbolism there, like the festivity was more for show than substance. Did your mother really think a party could cover up the cracks in your family's foundation? Or was it her way to cope, to force joy into a space that desperately needed it? You remember reading that ancient Romans threw lavish banquets to distract from political instability, which historians still argue about, whether it was decadence or survival strategy. Maybe your mom's party was just her version of a banquet, a desperate attempt to keep the peace. You sigh and sit by your son's bedside. His breaths are shallow but steady, a quiet rebellion against fate. You reach out, holding his hand gently, feeling the faint warmth that tells you he's still here, still fighting. And in that small moment, the noisy world outside fades into nothing. You step out of the ICU and into the hospital corridor, where time seems to move differently, slower, heavier, like you're wading through a thick fog of anxiety. Hospitals became symbols of hope only after the discovery of penicillin in 1928, which changed the course of medicine forever. Before that, many believed illness was fate or punishment. Talk about a rough bedtime story. Your phone buzzes, a message from your mother. She's asking if you enjoyed the party. You stare at the screen, baffled. How can she focus on such trivial things when your son is barely holding on? You think of the curious Victorian practice of mourning jewelry, where people wore tiny locks of hair from their deceased loved ones, both a tribute and a reminder of how deeply humans crave tangible connections in times of grief. Historians still argue whether such customs helped or hindered emotional healing. Your son's fiancée had whispered at the engagement dinner, "Wait, you're Michael Carter?" And now you realize how much your family's reputation has been wrapped up in misunderstanding and silence. Maybe your mother's obsession with parties is her way of pretending everything is normal, a fragile veneer over chaos. You steel yourself and reply to her with calm brevity, keeping the storm inside locked away. Outside, the world keeps spinning, unaware of the small battles being waged behind these sterile walls. You pull your jacket tighter, the chill seeping in like a reminder that some wounds take longer to heal than others. You glance back at the ICU door one last time for the night, whispering a silent promise to your son. You're here, and you're not leaving. Not now. You sit in the waiting room, its bland, fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead like an unwelcome lullaby. The smell of antiseptic mixes oddly with stale coffee and the faint scent of someone's forgotten lunch. A sensory cocktail that reminds you how hospitals have been both sanctuaries and prisons since the establishment of the first modern hospital in Paris in the early 18th century. They say the Hotel Dieu was less a hotel and more a chaotic blend of care and contagion. Not much has changed, except now there's Wi-Fi. Your phone buzzes again, this time a text from your brother. He wants to talk, says it's urgent. You can't decide if it's about your son or the looming tension between your mother and yourself. You remember an odd historical tidbit about how royal families once used elaborate codes and secret messages to communicate. Because even back then, family drama was never straightforward. Historians still argue whether those secretive tactics prevented disasters or caused even more misunderstandings. You realize that, just like those coded letters, your family conversations are layered with unspoken meanings, frustrations, and grudges. Your mother's focus on the birthday party felt like a deliberate distraction from the ICU drama, a defense mechanism maybe, or just plain denial. You wonder how much easier life would be if people just spoke honestly, but then again, who really knows how to do that? You type back a cautious, "Okay, let's talk," then tuck your phone away. The muffled sounds of the ICU beeping through the walls remind you that, despite the noise of family conflicts, your son's fight for life is the quiet epicenter of your world right now. The conversation with your brother unfolds like a late-night radio drama, quiet, tense, and full of pauses heavier than the words themselves. He confesses his own frustration, how caught in the middle he feels, juggling between your mother's demands and the urgent reality of your son's condition. You recall how hospitals first started using, quote, family liaison roles in the mid-20th century, aiming to ease exactly this kind of emotional traffic. Funny how, even with all that progress, the hardest part remains human connection. Your brother shares a bizarre fact about Victorian mourning customs, how families would commission photographs of deceased relatives to keep the memory alive. It's morbid but oddly comforting, a reminder that grief is as old as humanity itself. Historians still argue whether these practices helped people heal or just prolonged their pain. You think about your mother again, her obsession with the birthday party as a desperate attempt to cling to normalcy amid the chaos. Maybe it's easier to celebrate a milestone than to face the terrifying uncertainty of the ICU. You wonder if she's trying to rewrite reality, to erase the shadows your son's illness casts over the family. You sit back, tired, but oddly calm. Your brother's honesty cuts through the tension like a gentle knife, and you find yourself willing to forgive a little more, understand a little deeper. Because, in the end, everyone is just trying to survive this emotional storm. Even your mother, in her own complicated way. The hum of the hospital shifts from noise to a kind of lullaby, and you realize the fight isn't just your son's, it's yours too. And somehow, despite it all, you're still here, still holding on,